Hey everyone, Graham here from therecordingrevolution.com, and this video is for all of you kind of home studio guitar players, or if you're recording a band and you are recording guitar and you're looking to get a great guitar tone in the track, but you maybe have one guitar amp at your disposal. Now, what's the problem with one amp? Nothing, except for that it sounds like one amp. And ideally, if you're in a big budget studio and you have a big budget, you'd bring in a few different amps. You know, you'd have very British style tube amps, you'd have American style tube amps, you might have some solid state amps, you might have some vintage amps, some very heavily overdriven amps that are a little more modern sounding, and you could play around with all of them until you find the one you like. But not just that, you could record your parts through multiple amps and stack the sounds. So in the end, your track, even before it's mixed, has a thick, rich guitar tone because it's really a couple of different amps playing nicely together, covering different areas of the frequency spectrum. Now, you can't do that if you only own one amp. Now, what about virtual amps? Yes, absolutely. You can do anything you want with virtual amps. My only caveat is that a lot of virtual amps sound, well, virtual, and they're getting way, way better. Plus, sometimes you want to play your amp. You know, you've got your pedal board, you've got your tone on your amp that you like, and you like your amp's tone. But here's what I'm proposing. Why don't we do both, especially if you're a home studio guy? Why don't you record your amp with the tone you can get out of it, which is probably a good tone, but then also record through a virtual amp using a model that is very different from your current amp settings, so then you can blend the two. It's like you have unlimited amps. You are playing through a real amp, so you get that real amp feel, that real amp sound of air hitting a microphone, which I personally love, but you also get the flexibility and the unique tones that you can get out of a virtual amp at practically no cost. So here's an example of where I'm doing that in a track that we're recording. I've got 2 tracks of real amp at the bottom and 2 tracks of virtual amp at the top. Here's them together, and then I'll quickly show you what each amp style brings to the table, and by themselves how they're kind of okay, and together how they're a lot better. So that's the guitar. Here they are together, just the guitars. But here is just the amp tone, okay? This is, you know, these are both the same guitars. This is a Fender Telecaster with some P90 pickups. And these 2 tracks are played through a Vox AC15, so a very British style tube amp. Right? Very cool. Nice cut through, nice high end, a little bit of overdrive. But compare that to the 2 DI guitars, which I'm running through SansAmp at very different settings, okay? And a SansAmp kind of doesn't really model specific amps, they kind of hint at it. But take a listen to these tones I'm getting with a virtual amp. Right, totally different. A lot more muffled, a lot more gain, and a little punchier in the mid-range, right? A little less clarity, but more meat punch at the bottom. Because you think, oh, that's a lot more muffled, but then you compare it to this, and that seems to sound just too bright and thin by itself. So what I've really been prone to do is blend the 2 together because they sound very different, and no one's going to hear them by themselves, but together they can sound fuller. The Vox cuts through nicely. Take away the virtual. Bring those back in. Take away the amp. too muffled, too fake. So together you get the life and the clarity, but also the warmth and the different tone because they're modeling different amps also. Obviously one's a plug-in and one's a real amp with a microphone, and different microphones and different EQ settings on the guitar, and the amp would allow for different tones out of the single amp. I get that. And that's something you should experiment with. But my point being, for the home studio guy, if you own at least one guitar amp, why not mic that sucker up? Even if you have a virtual amp, mic up your real amp. Get good at recording a real guitar amp and get the best tone possible out of it. Play with pickup settings, play with tone, play with overdrive pedals, whatever you got. But then throw up in a couple of tracks and record the same parts perhaps, or complementary parts, through whatever virtual amp plugin you have. This one comes free. SansAmp is free in Pro Tools, so I didn't even spend any money on this. And you play through it, find a setting that is very different, but complements what you get, put them together, you might get a great tone, and together it'll all come together nicely.